The gospel lesson for today is from St. Matthew's Gospel, the 22nd chapter, beginning at the first verse. Once more Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, "The kingdom of God may be compared to a king who gave a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his slaves to call those who had been invited to the wedding banquet, but they would not come. Again, he sent other slaves, saying, 'Tell those who have been invited, look, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they made light of it and went away, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his slaves, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. And then he said to his slaves, 'The wedding is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore into the main streets and invite everyone you find to the wedding banquet.' Those slaves went out into the streets and gathered all whom they found, both good and bad, so the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing a wedding robe. And he said to him, 'Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding robe?' And the man was speechless. And then the king said to his attendants, 'Bind him hand and foot and throw him into the outer darkness, where there he will be weeping and gnashing his teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen.'" Here ends the lesson. A banquet. What's the motivation behind a banquet anyway? Some of you who have had children married and you provided a banquet for their wedding service know exactly what the planning of a banquet like that, what that entails, and let alone the costs of it. Those of you like Mary Lynn and Bob are looking forward to the day when Fiona gets married, and let's see, a wedding in those days will probably go about $175,000. We have no idea exactly what it's going to be like. And that'll be right after college. Take good care of your cars, folks, because it's unbelievable, isn't it? When we think about this stuff, it's unbelievable. I remember I went to a bar mitzvah when I was in the Sudbury church, and of course Sudbury's a wealthy community. Went to a bar mitzvah that cost $45,000. I mean, that's a Jewish equivalent to a confirmation class. Becca, did your mother and father spend $45,000 on your car? Did they promise you a car or anything? It's unbelievable, isn't it? And then the other thing about banquets, which I don't think we even consider until that time, like my daughter Sarah got married last October, the seating arrangements. Oh my God, how many times we went over those seating arrangements? Oh, you can't put him with her, you can't put them over there with these other people. And, all of a sudden I'm thinking, I got to send out Myers-Briggs inventories for people to take a personality test, and then we'll match them up at the table, because you can't just sit anybody with anybody else. And people are going around, well, that's the dancing table, that's the boring table, that's the table with all the rich people. It's unbelievable. It's just unbelievable. Obviously, a banquet, especially a wedding banquet, but any banquet that you and I would decide to throw, a banquet we have at church, is more than just a party. There's something else going on in these banquets. And Jesus so often used the banquet as the scene of his teaching. I read something by Robert Fulghum, who's written a lot of wonderful books. Robert Fulghum is a Unitarian pastor. And he says this: "Since the beginning of time, people who trust one another, care for one another, and are deeply connected to one another have shared food as a sign of and a reaffirmation of their relationship. When attention is paid to this sharing, it takes on a ritual character. The nurturing of the body becomes a metaphor of the mutual nourishing of lives. every time we hold hands and say a blessing before a meal, every time we lift a glass and say fine words to one another, every time we eat in peace and grace together, we have celebrated the covenants that bind us together. The things that bind us together. I believe that Robert Fulghum is right. It is a metaphor for mutually nourishing our lives. It's a beautiful scene, isn't it? Think about it. A beautiful scene when we could say we sit down and eat in peace and grace together, trusting, saying fine words to one another. I don't know if you've often heard beautiful toasts given at a banquet. Sometimes, usually when I do perform wedding ceremonies, I hand out a page of toasts for best man and maids of honor because I guess a lot of our people are not taught these things by their parents. They're not taught in schools, although I know one school teacher who does teach how to do a toast or a greeting at an affair like that. It's an important time, and it's an important time to say fine words about this gathering and about the people there. That scene of the banquet, however, is in stark contrast to our world today, isn't it? A time of peace and grace sitting down together. There's not much together in the world we're in today. It's a stark contrast. Our world is so chaotic right now. There's increased mistrust. We've seen what greed has done to our society and the societies of the world. And there's lots of words of blaming. Well, it's their fault, or these people's fault, or why doesn't that group do something about it? And of course, hatred is really something. In today's gospel lesson, Jesus' banquet story is really about God and God's desire for all people. Some of the harsh language, I share with you a little bit of scholarship about how this stuff is written. A lot of that harsh language that comes in, like being thrown out into gnashing of teeth and stuff like that, Jesus probably didn't say that. It was probably added by the early church because the early church was living in a time of persecution. And the early church didn't think there were any soft and smooth answers to this kind of stuff. And so much of that rhetoric that we read is hard and difficult because the people were suffering. Their faith in Jesus was costing some of them their lives. And so if, in fact, God was going to cast out those people who were so brutal and unbelieving, they hoped that God did it in a very powerful way.